You know those moments in Deep Rock where it seems impossible? You know, moments where everybody is running away? Well, not everyone. I value the gunner's bubble shield more than anything else a gunner can bring to the table. There's just nothing else in the game that can do what it does, and if used correctly, it can ensure victory in even the worst of situations. And ziplines aren't only just ways to get to and from somewhere. Learn how to survive while on them, and you can use builds to a greater effect. And if you haven't already tried it, all of the builds I use are tested in the survival training, which will be in the description. Essentially, you find common deaths by testing your survival time in a no Bosco Hazard 5 A-Quark mission. And if you keep dying by the same reasons, then you should try changing something on your build or your playstyle to deal with that specific problem, until you can survive longer. This is how I know what grenades to bring, what perks or secondary weapons to use, the difference between needing a bulldog for accuracy and long distance, or needing the Burt for close-up defense. It's always through a series of failures to find the thing that makes the difference. And we're not talking about casual play here, of course. Hazard 5 with teammates down is when the details start to matter more than your average mission. But there's a solution for every situation. Even movement alone can be what makes the difference. And here's an example of just that.
What are you gonna do? Told you. We're gonna hang out. Gonna watch a movie. Gonna take some pictures. Hey.
It was a Hazard 5 elimination with rival presence. After running out of ammo and reviving as much as I could, there was only so long I could stay alive jumping around with rival presence and a Dreadnought. So in a last-ditch effort to try and get some ammo, I end up in this unfortunate situation, which really was still kind of a win to me because I thought if the team can get here even to get the Nitra, then I've accomplished something, because I'm not really accomplishing anything with 0 bullets right now. But then everybody went down. So here I am. I have Iron Will with 1 shield, no ammo, a cave leech above me, a spitballer, and my team is down. But it's not over yet. If I can get ammo, then there's still hope. So of course, it's health first, throw a shield to move away from the leech. The shield is to recharge my personal shield as I need to leave this room because I cannot kill the leech or the spitballer. If I stay, I'm just going to be in the same situation. Get the Nitra I need, and survive with movement alone. People have actually backed out of this very game thinking it was hopeless. I get the ammo, return to my teammates, and we complete the mission.
Yeah! Rocket stone!
So movement might just be one of the most important things you can work on, in my opinion. Simply because of the fact that you can't just platform somewhere or drill somewhere. And on top of that, shooting your weapon slows you down. So using dash is highly recommended. I find that if I don't have that thing that can prevent me from going down, I end up burning through shields that could have been used in other situations. The way I manage my shields is more to prevent people from going down and have backups for if people go down. And it works very well. But the only reason I can do that is because I'm minimizing the amount of times I need to throw a shield down for myself. And a big part of that is dash. And if you jump when using it, you will go so much further, and sometimes you can get an extra jump in there to get across the room pretty quickly. And if you don't have dash or it's on cooldown, you can break your fall by holding the jump button and landing on a zipline. That's why I often use dash to run and jump to get out of a situation, because I can land on a zipline anywhere. It's so effective I actually do this with the NG and driller as well. You can also break your fall by holding the grab button and landing on a pipeline. Or if you have no choice, you can hold the jump button and break your fall by grabbing a ledge. It's also easier to move around if you hold the jump button when you're facing a ledge directly. Just like ziplines, it's easier to hold the grab button or jump button rather than timing it. Most of the time this will pull you up and you'll be able to move at ease. And if you don't have dash or zipline already set up, you'll always evade quicker if you zipline down rather than up. Up takes too long and can be risky. But if you zip downwards, you can jump and immediately fly down the line. Now, as far as being on a zipline mid-battle, this is a dividing subject, it seems. My friend Blaze here says that he plays the gunner like a bodyguard, prioritizing where he's shooting and aggro to support the team. I like this description, and I know he does it differently than me, but we accomplish the same goals here. So even though being on a zipline is not for everybody, it definitely has its uses. If you're on a zipline, you don't have to defend yourself and evade. It's much easier to prioritize targets. But the catch is that this isn't always a good idea, Mactera Plague being a great example of that. You'll spend so much time battling Mactera that you're not prioritizing anything team related, and you simply won't survive on a zipline. So here's the thing, a few rules to keep in mind. When you're on a zipline, use a zipline dedicated build. Why not? This means you can quickly kill a spitter or Mactera if you need to. It also means your primary can benefit from being on a zipline, which I'll give build examples of later in the video. Also expect Mactera and spitters to aggro you. I mean, it's like the first thing you have to deal with when you're on a zipline is those threats. It's predictable. Another rule that keeps me alive is when you hear the sound of a Mactera that's about to shoot you, you just slide down the zipline. You won't have time for anything else, and it's usually as easy as just aiming forward. Same thing if there are 3 or 4 Mactera at once. It's best just to slide down the zipline. This way you avoid taking damage or getting knocked off. Another rule that can prevent fall damage or even dying is a double zipline. Essentially, you'll set up your zipline with a safety zipline, so if you get knocked off, you just have to hold the grab button to break your fall. And finally, if there are too many spitters and you notice that you're not really helping the team, but rather you're on spitter duty, then that's not the most effective thing you could be doing. The idea is that it only takes seconds to deal with spitters, so that you can then help the team. Not be up there forever, just only focused on spitters. Ziplines are also great for friendly fire reasons. This is why I'm always on them during the black boxes. I take far less friendly fire, and I can still focus where I need to. Again, I'm not even on a zipline for every mission type. It depends on how I feel, and it depends on what kind of mission it's going to be. Because look, Deep Rock has randomly generated missions. You may get a Praetorian Swarm or a Mactera Swarm, and both change everything about how you approach it. Most of my advice in my videos are for very specific situations, but it's my many deaths that tell me what areas I don't want to fight in, what situations I don't want to be in. And when worst comes to worst, and it will, just find your local driller and fight next to them. A gunner driller combo can be amazing, whether it's shattering frozen bugs or lighting goo on fire. You see, I think the gunner is an overall more effective class based on the rest of the team's roles and how well they do them. If a scout is lighting the caves during battle, a gunner can make use of the long-range capabilities he has. Flares alone increase the gunner's effectiveness. With platform staircases and tunnels dug, evading isn't so bad because you always have a way to get places. If a scout is getting Nitra efficiently, then it allows you to use even more bubble shields, more grenades, and just more ammo overall. All these things help the gunner to better protect the scout while the scout is getting resources or objectives. It's this synergy that enables the gunner to be a bodyguard like Blaze had described. You keep ammo in my weapon, and the cave's lit, I can do my role better. And if I'm keeping bugs away from you, you can do your role better. But of course the rest is up to you. Finding a build that's fun to use, but also effective. Sometimes, it's the smallest adjustments that can make the biggest differences. And sometimes it's not even skill related at all, because builds aren't always going to be as simple as aiming and shooting. Every weapon has a nuance that can make or break your performance when it really matters. For example, the rocket launcher has guided missiles. So even when you look around, there may be leftover rockets following your trail, which can make friendly fire very easy. So I have the habit of switching weapons when I'm looking around and switching back when shooting. This ensures that the missiles will trail off and not follow your crosshair anymore. Another thing you can do when using this is destroy terrain pretty easily, which can be useful for destroying harmful crystals, whether radioactive or the laser crystals during the Hearthstone battle. Or even getting red sugar for you and your teammates. And when you're fighting a spitballer, all you have to do is aim up after it shoots and you will block the projectile every time. Because your rockets are already in the air. So when you move up slightly, there are rockets already in the air between you and the projectile, blocking it. I would also suggest a new way to bunny hop. Bunny hopping is different for the gunner. As where everybody else can just move around and shoot freely, the gunner is slow when he's shooting, so bunny hopping isn't as effective as the other classes. But if instead you stop shooting right before you jump, you cover more distance faster, because the slow effect happens when you're firing your weapon. So backing up and jumping is not quite enough. As where if you stop shooting for the jump, you actually have enough distance between you and the enemy to kill the bugs before they get to you. This is something that works with all of the gunner's primary weapons. Another thing about the rocket launcher is getting used to following your enemies from a distance. Just that can be a whole new skill that you have to get good at. Guiding rockets to the right spots may actually be something you have to get better at or change. This build, for example, is what I use for Dreadnought missions. But it really only shines when you're getting critical hits, which I can't always do from a distance. So I either commit to this build and get better with it, or I use something that doesn't require that nuance. This build is a great example of that. I used it as my main for the majority of my rocket launcher experience, and I still use it from time to time. It really doesn't have a major nuance other than the aiming of the actual rockets. But once you get that down, there's nothing really specific you have to do. The high projectile speed makes it easier to aim, and the faster fire rate makes you do more damage, because you're shooting more rockets much faster. This build really does have a bit of everything. Some people may find it difficult to adjust to the time it takes for the rockets to hit the enemy. It gives the illusion that you're not even doing much damage. I assure you, all of my builds are tested, and not just solo with Bosco. Always scaled up with 4 people and a has 5. So stick with it unless, you're already happy with what you have. So let's look at something way more nuanced than even that Dreadnought build. This is a long distance area of effect zipline build. And it's definitely not best for every situation. It's made for being in one spot for a while. Point extraction missions, refinery missions, and even drill dozer missions all work. So how it works is you have a very slow moving projectile, and it gains increased damage the longer they're in the air. That's why sometimes I'll do this, to build up the damage that every rocket's doing. It will definitely have its uses when you need to do a lot of single target damage. Not the way to use the build, but it's good to know that you can do more damage this way if you need to. Another thing about this build is the reason why I choose ammo over damage or the area of effect mod is because it's very easy to overshoot with this weapon. Because the rockets take so long to reach their destination, it's hard to gauge what you're doing to the enemy, because by the time the rockets get there, you may have shot way more than is actually needed. You can get used to this and start adjusting how many rockets you shoot out based on just maining this class, and then you'll start knowing to only shoot maybe 2 or 3 rockets for 1 or 2 grunts at a time. But that is why I bring the extra ammo, because it is something that will happen, especially if you have a whole bunch of grunts. You're just going to hold down the fire button until everybody's dead. So there's a pretty high chance you're going to have a lot of leftover rockets, and that's why I mentioned earlier about canceling your auto aim when you're looking around and you have all these rockets flying around, hitting all your teammates. And because it's area of effect, or a splash damage build, you want to target groups or waves of enemies. Being on a zipline does this effectively, as the enemies will not branch off from the group to find you, which means bigger groups, which is way more efficient for an AoE build. And because you're on a zipline, you can target anywhere and prioritize where you need to lay down fire. And of course, the further away the enemy, the more damage you'll do. Even if you doubt this build, try it out. It shouldn't be as good as it is, but it's honestly my go-to if I'm feeling like that playstyle. With all of these builds, it's really just about forcing the situation. Splash damage builds are not going to shine if you're only shooting at a couple grunts here and there. And again, that's why they're not always my favorite builds for every mission type. That's why I use so many different loadouts for Gunner. Sometimes I want to be jumping around and evading, but it pays to have a build made for that. And speaking of, if ziplining isn't your thing, then I do recommend something like Burning Hell. It burns enemies in front of you, and if you combine it with the bunny hopping for extra distance, you can easily burn the enemies and jump backwards far away enough to get out of danger. Again, this is somewhat of a hyper detail here for the Gunner. The rest of the classes can back up and shoot no problem. It's really just these big clunky slow weapons that become a problem when enemies start closing in on you. But that's why I like Burning Hell. It's a nice close-up build and it can do a little bit of everything else as well. I'd also recommend you have a plan for that instead of just throwing out a shield the second that you're, surrounded. There are going to be times where you need to do that and should, but you should also have a way out, and I think Burning Hell is a really good nomination for that. I've used all of these builds in Hazard 5, so it's really up to you to make it work. Put yourself in situations where your builds shine. But that's what the survival training is for. And although I don't do a lot of ziplining with this gun, there is one overclock I do use ziplines for. And that's Lead Storm. And I know ziplining isn't for everybody, but look, if I can't move when using it, I can either micromanage those movement mechanics, or I can be on a zipline, not having to worry about evading. I mean, it works for me, and it makes a pretty good Dreadnought build as well. It's also important to note that the reload animation for this weapon does not speed up the cooldown. It's just an animation. But if you have enough time with any build, you can adjust to the nuance and make it work. Again, that is what the survival training is for. Finding the right secondary combinations, perk combinations, or just movement until you survive longer. I'm not going to go through this gun too much. It's been around for ages, and generally speaking, if your caves are lit up and you can shoot enemies at a distance, you'll mostly be okay as long as you have your movement down. I had a whole thing on bullet hell as well. It's another one of those situational builds, but I'm not going to go into it into detail because that's, again, what the survival training is for. You can find out what situations work best for that build. My advice for any build, for any class, is just find the thing that is the most fun to you and make it work. I've done the majority of my Elite Deep Dive experience with arc turrets and spinning death because that was the coolest thing to me. With some teamwork and movement and some practice, you really can make anything work in this game. Again, I'm not going to go over every single detail, especially if you're using the Thunderhead Autocannon. Most of you know how to aim and shoot.
Most of you know how to aim and shoot.
And it has so many great builds, but there are a few nuanced things that I like to point out, like how the crosshair can make it tough to target certain enemies' weak points. But depending on what else you bring with you, it's really not a major issue, especially with things like fear. And if you haven't used fear on any build for this weapon, then you're missing out. For just one single mod on a weapon, I can't believe how effective fear is in this game. I could do an entire compilation on fear absolutely dominating in every situation, but I'm not going to. That's definitely something you should see for yourself if you already haven't. And for its full effect, you really need the higher rate of fire here, because the more bullets that hit the enemy, the more chances are that you're going to trigger the fear. So the only other thing I'm actually going to bring up with this weapon is a nuance with Neurotoxin and Carpet Bomber. For the Neurotoxin, you don't actually have to focus on damage whatsoever. With the high fire rate combined with fear, you only have to shoot until they're poisoned, and then you can move on. I do know a lot of people choose damage for this, and if it works for you, great. But I'm just saying you don't actually have to. You only have to shoot an enemy until it's both poisoned and feared. And then you can shoot something else. They will eventually either die or they'll come back with very little health and be very easy to kill at that time. This build just works, it's super fun. Again, the only nuance is not to, focus on an oppressor or something and try to completely kill it with this weapon. Poison it, then move on, or have, like I said, a bulldog or something else for those oppressors. This overclock at least has been used in the community for a long time, and for a very good reason. Other than what I mentioned, it's not a very complicated build. That's why I'm not going to go through it in detail. You can just do what I was saying, grab this build, and go to a Has 5. And if you've never used it, you really got to give it a try. But when it comes to nuanced builds, Carpet Bomber is definitely one of them. It seems this is another dividing overclock. But when you hear about a build that you've been using for years to carry doesn't work well, it raises some questions. So after talking to the community, friends, and reading through heated arguments about this, there are a few things that might be happening here to give people completely different experiences. One of them is actually just luck. You can't control what builds your team uses or how well they play. If you're playing with people that are clearing every wave of bugs, you're really not going to see this build shine. I played the same Elite Deep Dive with high level players and then low level players. The build was okay with the high level players, but it was amazing with the low level players. But why the big difference? With the Greybeards, we were a little more spread out, making the bugs split up, because everybody can handle their own. With the Greenbeards, we often stayed together, making the enemies group up and the Carpet Bomber more effective. Because they didn't have wave clearing builds or experience, Carpet Bomber was able to pick up all of that slack. Sometimes it's down to how your teammates are playing, and this is beyond your control. Some builds just shine better based on the skill level of the people you're playing with. A great example of that is the Scout's Pheromone build. It's excellent, one of my favorites, unless your team is killing every single bug within half a second of it spawning. Then it's pointless. Not that it matters, if your team is killing everything then you're winning. But my point is that sometimes the randomness of this game, the people you're playing with, the builds that they're using, and the roles that they're doing if they're doing them at all, and even random generated mechanics of the game itself are all things that can affect how difficult a mission is or how effective you think you're being. The other thing I noticed was a lot of people focus on damage points for this build, which is another thing that will change your results. If you want direct damage, there's better builds for that. You can also use your secondaries for that. Here are a couple great ones I use for almost everything. The thinking is that because you're losing significant direct damage, you can gain it back and make a more balanced build. But all you're really doing is having a less effective other direct damage build that you could be using. Even balanced ones like this that still has armor break naturally on the gun, it already has AoE built in, and you're doing direct damage. I just think it's the wrong type of overclock to start focusing on direct damage. You can see here at the top I've added the damage modifiers to Carpet Bomber, and if you compare that to, of course, Big Bertha, splintering shells, or even other weapons, you're just not getting the most out of those damage points really with that build. And again, there's more balanced builds as well if you're just trying to balance it out. And this could be what's leading to somebody saying, well, I'm shooting at a group of enemies and they're not dying that quickly. It's not really that effective. But for me, it is effective. Not only are our builds different, but I am only focused on the largest group of enemies that I can get, and I do that by staying on a zipline, staying near my teammates, and being ready for the right situations where the build will shine. And lastly, if I choose Fear on this, it's just going to separate the pack, making my AoE less effective. Hence why I choose the damage at full rate of fire combined with reaching full rate of fire faster. So at first glance, it might not look the greatest. But again, as somebody that mained this for so long, I had to dive a little bit deeper into this to find out what is going on. And as always, if it's working for you, you don't have to change it. You've probably adapted to the nuance of your build, and that's why it works for you. Just don't let another person's experience determine your own when you haven't really given it a chance. At the end of the day, you prove how well your build is working and how well you're doing by playing the game and doing well in the game. Perks. Perks are something I'm going to go into more detail in through YouTube Shorts. But here's my opinion on perks in general. Just know that when you're selecting a perk, the value of it is only relevant to your build and purpose. For example, Born Ready on a weapon that doesn't have reload. Does that make Born Ready a useless perk? Definitely not. Only in context to the rest of the build. I have some very specific builds that are made up for being in one spot, not moving around or evading. They work well but require a teammate to use. And let me tell you that the perks I use on that build are seldom ever used for any of my loadouts or any of my classes. But because of the purpose and specific situations that the build will be used in, combined with somebody else, suddenly those perks make more sense and have a significant function. You can also just have perks you never use. I've played with teams so good that I never used Iron Will for months at a time. So I changed it when playing with them because it never really got to the point that I would have to use it. Don't get me wrong, it's an excellent perk. I'm just talking about like 6 months of never using it when playing with these people. And then that freed up 2 slots for me because I didn't need Vampire anymore. So I just make a loadout for when I'm playing with those people. Don't just pick something because people say it's the best. Think about it and analyze what you're using in the survival training to stay alive, or what you could have used to stay alive. The ones that I have stuck to over the years do tend to be Thorns, Born Ready, Vampire, Iron Will, and Dash. At the beginning of this video, I mentioned how I value the gunner's bubble shield more than anything else. To be more specific, it's rather the full potential of how they're used. Full potential not only meaning when you throw them, but also how many you're using in a mission. The more used in a mission, the easier the mission will be if used correctly. Here's an exercise you can start doing to understand this entire concept. And it's not just for gunners, so for everyone who plays this game, start doing this, and over a course of time, you will see your own consistency that is tailored to you and the people you play with. Not just my experience. So firstly, take a mental note of how many bubble shields were used in the mission. Then at the end of the mission when you're leaving, look at how many resupplies were called. Do this on every mission, and it won't take long for you to realize that there is way more potential for the shield than you might think. All without depleting valuable shields that you might need. This may sound confusing at first, but here's an example. Recently I played a Hazard 5 Drill Dozer mission, and it took 2 resupplies to get to the Hearthstone, and then we dropped 4 more at the Hearthstone. The gunner used 2 shields for the entire mission. So that means if the gunner used 10 more shields, he would still have 4 right now. Because the gunner starts with 4 shields, and every time you grab an ammo, you're getting 2 more. This means every time the gunner would grab ammo, he would have 4 full shields. When you're good at evading, you may have extra shields, and you don't always need to throw a shield for revives if the area is clear. This may lead to having extra shields. So basically, our gunner could use 2 extra shields for every ammo that was dropped, and they would still have full shields. I'm not expecting anybody to use all of their shields. I know full well that you need them for what-if moments. The point of this exercise is to determine how many bubble shields could have been used for free.
It's free real estate.
Because every time you grab ammo with 4 full bubble shields, you're just burning 2 that could have been used. Now this is pretty generous, I would say. I'm not asking for you to use all of your shields. I'm asking for you to use the ones disappearing into the ether when you grab ammo and you have 4 shields on you. Those 2 shields add up in a mission, and I can't help but think back to so many times when it would have prevented downs, health damage, or repairs for Doretta. And don't forget that bubble shields don't only protect you, it recharges your personal shield. When I'm playing and I see a bubble shield, I am headed straight to it just to charge my shields. They can make every mission easier without sacrificing your entire stock. So you're basically using free shields. And I think you'll be surprised to see that people are going down less in the missions with more shields to go around. So it's very simple. When you're using up your primary ammo and you're about to call in or go get ammo, you have 2 that you can use between now and that resupply. So that when you grab the ammo, you're back to 4 full bubble shields, and you're not wasting the other 2. If you do this, there will be more shields overall throughout the missions, and it will make a noticeable difference, especially when it's something like 10 extra shields. So here's the thing. This method isn't meant to criticize, although you may feel that way. This is something I do for myself on every mission for every class because that's just how I learned how hard I was making the missions for myself when I could have used 15 more grenades than I did. It's how I know that most missions we are not using enough ammo, making the mission more difficult than it needs to be. So let's keep it very simple like I said earlier. Just start by keeping a mental tab on resupplies to bubble shield frequency. There should be 2 bubble shields used for every resupply grabbed. Otherwise, it's you that's wasting precious ammo, not me that's using precious ammo. And also, those 2 bubble shields that don't get used could be used as something else for every other class. That's half of somebody's primary, secondary, we're talking nukes, we're talking satchels, it's everything. So why not use the ammo that you're given? It just makes more sense. The more ammo used, the easier the missions will be, I promise you. Don't worry about overthinking things when you're playing either. This is for after the mission is over, so in hindsight you can see if there's room for improvement. Even if you just start using 1 shield to throw on the resupply when you call it, that's fine, everything helps. And if you're still not sure when to throw them, keep an eye on your teammates' icons. If somebody's taking damage, you can actually see it. That's a great opportunity to throw a shield their way, provided that you're grabbing ammo soon. But honestly, the best way to learn where there's new opportunities to throw shields is just by playing every other class. There will be way more times than you might think that you will say, I could use a shield right now. And then just look out for those situations when you're playing the gunner. And the same principle goes for everyone else for every other class. A major part of why this works so well is through maximizing Nitra count through speed and team efficiency, so you can use as much ammo as needed, or even more so. For me, this makes Deep Rock way more fun and Hazard 5s more viable. Anyways, this is going down a Nitra rabbit hole, so do this, but do it for your own adjustments, not someone else's. Let people play how they want. This is for your own knowledge for when you are playing the gunner, not to change how other people are playing. Because even in my example, where we weren't as efficient as we could have been and it would have been way easier, we still got through it. Big waste on ammo, could have been easier, but hey, we got through the mission. I'm not gonna bug other people about how they play. It's just a great way to understand the full potential of ammo, and specifically bubble shields in Deep Rock Galactic. More shields, more of the time is better for everybody. Surely you agree. Let me know in the comments. Now there's actually a lot that I've left out, but to be fair, I've seen bronze 1-star gunners do pretty good in this game. That's why I'm not going into crazy detail here. So to sum up the secondary weapons really quickly, most of the time when I'm using a secondary weapon, it's because I'm reloading my primary weapon. It's a lot easier for me to switch to a secondary weapon where I can still do damage, still defend myself, and just let the primary reload through Born Ready. So because of that, I need a secondary weapon that is almost as good as the primary. That would be this right here. It kills things quickly, it's got lots of ammo, and it's reliable. If I'm going to switch to it, it needs to be able to keep me alive. And this definitely does. But then there are some times where I need long distance or I need weak point damage, and that is going to be the Bulldog. Although you have to be quite accurate with it, it's better if you just wait for the crosshair to get small and take your time with your shots. I don't use it often, but it pairs really great with builds like Carpet Bomber that doesn't have that long distance accuracy. And as far as the coil gun goes, I don't really use it that much, but it is very helpful on my Dreadnought build, because I don't have a wave clearing function on that build. So I find that when I come upon a group of enemies, I can actually just line them up and take them out pretty easily. It can be very fun and very effective, but unfortunately that's the only loadout that I use it for. And while the coil gun can also destroy crystals, and I should be recommending for everybody to ping enemies so that the gunner can better target them, in my experience, I can usually kill an enemy with this before I can get everything lined up with this. Sorry, that's just how it is. But because I don't use the coil gun very much, tell me some of the builds that you guys are using in the comments and I'll check them out. And that's pretty much all I'm going to cover for the secondaries. You guys know me. I don't usually say, hey, use this build and you'll be fine. But hey, use this build and you'll be fine. And the grenades I'm going to cover in another video, for all the classes. Just know that I don't use the same grenades for every loadout. The grenade I use is always to complement what I'm struggling with through my tailored survival training. Depending on what primary I bring in, it might be waves of enemies or it might be Praetorians. Then I just pick the thing that helps me stay alive and deal with that issue. More on all the grenades coming soon. And finally, if you made it this far in the video, that means that you made it past the bubble shield part and the secondary weapon part. Arguably the most boring parts of the video. So if you did make it this far, leave a gibberish comment just to confuse everybody else. Together, maybe it won't take me 3 years to make every video. And thanks to everybody that helped make the video, I couldn't have done it without you. Well, I could, it just wouldn't have looked as good. I appreciate you, and until next time, everybody.
It's free real estate.